Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, will declaring racism a public health crisis put an end to discrimination? Apple ballot prevails in Montgomery County Board of Education primary election. Montgomery County trails the rest of the state in COVID reopenings. Is it time to end the lockdown? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the former mayor of Rockville, Susan Hoffmann. Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher. Education activist, Cynthia Rubenstein. And president of the Chevy Chase Women's Republican Club, Laurie Halverson. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. 14 days after the videotape of George Floyd's death went viral around the world, Floyd was laid to rest in his native home of Houston, Texas. The next day, his brother, Philanese Floyd, came before Congress and pleaded with lawmakers to stop the pain in memory of George. Now, lawmakers at all levels of government must deal not only with the probable cause of Floyd's death, but also the deadly and wanton destruction that was spawned by the protests and riots that followed. Mark, written in the National Review, was this statement: "For a brief moment, we had a broad bipartisan national consensus that the police should not kill those in their custody. Then our warring faction of idiots went and ruined it." What caused a nation's moment of grief to turn so wrong?
Well, it's unfortunate. First of all, I would disagree with it. It was a brief. I think there still is a broad consensus that to that point that we want to see stronger policing methods. The problem, though, is that some of the responses were just simply way too extreme, and I think out of step with what Americans want. I don't think Americans want to defund their police, but they also want to have police officers who are respectful of the population and as the National Review said, don't kill people in custody.
Well, the remarkable thing about Floyd's death and the impact that it had on everyone's lives is that it was so broad in nature. It wasn't localized to Minneapolis, where there may or may not be a bad police force. It may be something much more beyond that, where it really gripped the nation in what was, a bad moment in our time.
I agree. I mean, there are about 1,000 people every year who are killed by police officer. According to the Washington Post statistics that they compiled, about 70% involve officers who are faced with a gun or a knife. So that breaks it down to about 300 incidents where somebody is killed where there is absolutely no weapon involved.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is an issue that has gripped everyone. Now, Cynthia, former President Obama tweeted that millions of Black Americans, for them, being treated differently by the criminal justice system on account of race is tragically, painfully, maddeningly normal. But there are those like Peter Krasnow, a member of the United States Civil Rights Commission, that challenge this view as a false narrative, saying that the statistics do not support systemic racism by the police. What do you think?
I don't know who this person is, but you can ask any young Black person or middle-aged Black person, and they've grown up being stopped by the police or questioned by the police. It's called, driving while Black, walking while Black, jogging while Black, going into a retail store while Black. I don't know who this person is, but that is just an unbelievable statement.
Well, I think there is a feeling, and it's not just this one particular member of the Civil Rights Commission, but there are many who want to challenge the narrative that we are a racist society, They don't agree with that concept. And that as tragic as this event was, there is not systemic racism in our country.
There absolutely is. If you look at, I have a book recommendation for everybody on this panel to read, and it is called The Color of Law. And it is a book written about housing, official federal housing policy that explicitly has contributed to the segregation of cities and neighborhoods, and the fact that Black families do not have the wealth that white families do because their housing investments are not there. That's one example. Then we could look at education. We could look at healthcare and the state of health of Black Americans. It is self-evident that we are still a racist country.
Susan, I'll get to you in a second, all right? I want to go to Laurie on this. Laurie, here in Montgomery County, 7 police officials condemned what happened to Floyd in Minneapolis, but they condemned it as an abject failure of policing and stressed to the public that police in Montgomery County will not tolerate disparate treatment in any form. So can the public here in Montgomery County trust what these police officers and police chiefs are saying?
You know, I really thought that the letter that they all came together on, the chiefs came together on and signed was very appropriate. And I think our county has done so much already to try to deal with the racism. And they're wearing body cameras now. There's now a commission on policing, which will be forming. And I'm actually concerned they may be going in the other direction, where the police may be afraid to work in our county. They may be afraid that they'll be arrested and, for making a mistake. I'm really concerned. I'm also concerned that Will Jawando seems to have something against the school resource officers, or SROs. I personally was shadowing 2 policemen in the past, about 5 years ago, and I was very impressed with their professionalism in dealing with several incidents that occurred in just a half of a day. I think that removing our school resource officers from our school system would be devastating, and it actually is a very good program that helps children to understand the policemen and helps relations between police and children and teens.
Thanks. Now, Susan, go ahead. I'm going to let you, before I pose my question to you, I'd like your comment following up with what Cynthia had to say.
Yes, I just wanted to circle back to that for a moment. Again, as Cynthia said, I have no idea who this gentleman is. And I think if we look at our history over the last 400 years, I think systemic racism, certainly we can find evidence of that throughout that.
But isn't that the whole point?
But let me make my point.
Not to try to cover 400 years.
No, it's not. Let me just get to my point.
Whether we have a period now.
I am the mother
civil rights amendments back in the 60s, whether or not we've had progress on civil rights and advancement in the treatment of people of color.
I want to make my point, please, which is that I am the mother of a boy who happens to be white. I did not have to have the talk with my son because he's white. If I were African American and I had an African American son, I would have had to have had the talk about how he behaves in public, what happens, what he needs to do when he is pulled over by the police, that he has to keep his hands on the wheel. There's so many things that they have to do because they're Black. And so to ignore that is to ignore the fact that there is systemic racism in the United States.
Susan, let me say this. What makes you think you shouldn't have had that talk with your son about how to behave in public and how to interface with the police? I would say you were being a negligent mother for not having that conversation with him, because all parents should have that conversation with their children as to how they act in public and how they are to be acting around police. Police have tremendous power over lives, not just the lives of Black children. Mark, The Washington Post.
What I'm saying is not that I didn't teach my son good manners, but that he would, when he is pulled over, yes, he must behave respectfully to the police. Of course, that's not what I'm talking about. But his life would not necessarily be in danger because he was pulled over. That is not the case in many places.
Again, we're going to get, I don't want to get lost in the weeds of statistics, but statistics don't support your proposition right now that all black men that are being pulled over are in danger of their lives. But I want to go on because I want to ask you this question as a follow-up to the protests that we saw. At first, the protests seemed very misdirected. There was no central guidance other than the outrage over Floyd's senseless death. But now they seem to have morphed into a message of defund the police, and which means the elimination of police altogether. Now, you were a former mayor of a large city here in the state of Maryland. Would you support defunding and elimination of the police?
I think the term defund the police is a very poor choice of words, and that term was not run through a focus group because it certainly doesn't represent what they're talking about. So, you know, on first contact, when you hear that term, it sounds crazy. But I think there's a better word for it. It's more cumbersome, but it's reform the police, it's reevaluate, it's revisit the structure. I think it's really important to know how it can be done. It was extremely successfully done in Camden, New Jersey, which may have, people in this part of the country may not have realized because it's a little bit far north, but it's right across the Delaware River from Philadelphia, where I grew up. Camden had a serious crime problem, and in 2013, they decided to significantly pivot to community policing. And what they did was they wanted to add more police to the street, and they couldn't afford it because of the union agreements. These were being extremely well paid. So what they did, and it's really amazing, but it worked, was they dissolved the police department. They merged with county police, Camden County Police, and most of the police officers focus on policing on the streets of the city of Camden. And there is the crime rate is down, homicides are down to 25 from 67.
Well, look, the fact is, we don't have to look to Camden. We can look in Montgomery County, where we have an excellent police force, and we've had excellent leaders who have advocated the fair treatment of everyone. Mark, I want to go to you because we're running out of time.
Sure, and let me pick on one of the observations that Susan.
What is the clear meaning of defund the police?
Well, and let me kind of pivot off of Susan's example, because she touched on one of the key elements of that Camden example, which was that the role that police unions in some jurisdictions have in fighting for disciplinary action and breaking down the controls. And that's one of the things that happened in Camden. But here's the issue. In Baltimore, a little closer to home, there are 348 murders in 2019. Relative to population, that's about 300 more than would be normal in a city of that size. Defunding the police would put more people, largely people of color, because that's the population of Baltimore, at risk. So you can't have the protections that we expect from the police if you end up not providing the resources that they need in order to be able to protect us.
All right, so I want before we as we close, we have about a minute left in this segment. Cynthia, I want to go to you because the Montgomery County Council has been very active since this council was inaugurated last year about social justice activism, and they have passed significant legislation in the county council addressing social racism and other factors, both in the police and in society in general. They're now debating a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. What are we to make of this declaration?
Well, number one, we have seen very clearly during the COVID-19 crisis that Black people are much more highly impacted. So that is one big example of, yes, Black people are on the front lines working. They're more likely to live in crowded housing situations, more likely to have underlying health conditions that are being impacted by coronavirus. So that's one example. So yes.
Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap. So I guess we'll bring, some kind of action against the Chinese government for introducing it into the Black population.
Coronavirus came into the United States from Europe, not China.
When we come back from this short break, primary election results are in, and this and the state of Maryland, but not Montgomery County, is posed to reopen. It is a time for the lockdown orders to end altogether. Stay tuned. And welcome back. In the COVID-19 era, nothing can be taken at face value anymore. You could say that 2 weeks ago, Marylanders went to the polls in the delayed primary elections, but then that would ignore the fact that the elections were conducted primarily by mail. Mark, how successfully run was the primary election statewide and here in Montgomery County?
I think there was a lot to be very concerned about. First of all, a lot of people who are held on the voter rolls had ballots sent to them, even though they haven't voted in Maryland for years. And I think that long-term, that's something that really needs to be examined because it's a potential for fraud. Also, we did learn that people like to vote in person. The lines at the few voting spots that were available, I think there were 5 in Montgomery County, were much longer than expected.
Was that a failure on voting officials not to anticipate that?
I think so. I mean, I think they tried hard to say mail it in, but I don't think they recognize that A, there's a preference for voting in person, and B, there are a lot of situations in terms of issues with change of address registration, wherever, which would cause people to want to do it in person.
Yeah, I think it was amazing that people even found out about where to vote because, on voting day, because I had to go through, when I looked where to vote, I went on the Board of Elections website. It took me like at least 10 minutes to find it. It should have been front and center where you could go in your county, and it wasn't. So I think it was only by word of mouth and emails.
All right, Cynthia, the hot election was in the school board races where the anti-boundary study candidate, Stephen Austin, was defeated by incumbent Lynn Harrison. Sunil
Dasgupta.
Sunil Dasgupta, thank you. I've only practiced that 15 times before coming on the air and still screwed it up. Tell us about that race and what happened.
Well, what happened in this primary, and some people were worried that 2 very progressive candidates in Lynn Harris and Sunil Dasgupta would split the vote and, bring Stephen Austin in. But what we found was that voters were not buying what Stephen Austin was selling. And what he was selling was the so-called neighborhood schools, which is code for keeping those people out of our schools.
I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that Sunil and Lynn both had very big endorsements with mailings that a first-time candidate, Stephen Austin, didn't have. He had a very excellent turnout. He came in 3rd. A lot of people didn't know who he was because it's during the coronavirus, he couldn't get out there in person. So he had to, based on, he's just using his Facebook page and online trying to reach people. So I disagree. I think he ran a great race.
So, here's the question. We can either talk about Baltimore City or we can talk about the failure of County Executive Elrich to reopen Montgomery County. Let's pick on Mark since we only have 2 minutes left. Laurie, Governor Hogan announced the state was poised to move into phase 2 reopenings, and immediately, of course, County Executive Mark Elrich said that we're not ready. But given the tensions that most residents are feeling about, and businesses also, about the lockdowns, isn't it time to declare victory over COVID and just fully reopen?
Yeah, I think that we should have reopened along with the state. I thought Governor Hogan has been doing a good job in leadership in that area, and I think it's time. I have friends who have needs for surgery and they're not able to get it. I have a friend who tried to have her toenails clipped. She went into a nail salon and thought it, they didn't know that they weren't supposed to be open, but they were open. And the police came and they had to escape the back door. So it's like an 85-year-old woman had to escape the police. That's just this is not our county. I
want to give Susan the last word because I deleted her question. So Susan, are we ready to open up?
We're ready to open up when the science says so. We're ready to open up when Dr. Travis Gales, who is our public health officer, when all of the benchmarks that we've set have been met, and to open too soon is foolhardy in the extreme. And we can see what's happening in Arkansas. We can see what's happening in Arizona and in Florida and in Texas. There are spikes.
What happened in Arkansas?
I meant Arizona. Apologies.
Because we had the party at the Lake of the Ozarks. It was a great time. I wish
that was amazing. It's amazing that there wasn't a spike. So
nobody got it.
But that's part of the issue.
It's not as contagious as everybody thinks.
We do not know enough about coronavirus to be foolish and careless.
Well, you have the last word, Susan. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from the short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
As we focus on criminal justice because of the tragic incident in Minneapolis, it's worth focusing on some of the very positive developments, bipartisan efforts that have addressed criminal justice reform at the national level with the First Step Act, which was passed in 2018, and also the efforts in Maryland. Both Will Smith and both Senator Smith and Senator Michael Huff working together for positive reform.
Thank you, Mark. Cynthia Rubenstein, your parting shot.
I want to acknowledge all of those protesters in Washington, D.C. and across Montgomery County in the last week to 2 weeks, who most of whom are under the age of 30 and who have been self-organizing, and they have kept it up because my belief is that we are going to need all those Gen Z people and their slightly older peers and younger peers to become the next greatest generation and fix what we screwed up.
That's an interesting slant on things. Thank you, Cynthia. And Laurie, your parting shot.
I want to say congrats to all of our graduates. I saw a lot of Winston Churchill cars painted up, ready. Everyone's all excited, even though they've had a difficult time. I think that I've seen some kids really having a good time. I also want to shout out, I'm really grateful for Judicial Watch. They got involved in a county race or a county issue where our county executive has a program to give $10 million to our illegal aliens in a relief program because of COVID-19. They ruled that it's likely to violate federal law and causes irreparable harm to taxpayers. So we will see more about that, and we'll also see state law coming up in the future, I think, about this issue.
Thank you, Laurie. Susan Hoffmann, lead us out of here.
So tonight, although you'll probably have to find it on a replay, tonight all of the police chiefs of Montgomery County and the sheriff are going to be doing a town hall to talk about all of the issues we talked about today. And so try to find it on Montgomery County's YouTube page on the homepage. And also I want to, on a personal note, say rest in peace, my dear friend Phil Alperson, someone who worked for Senator Chris Van Hollen when he was a council member. When he was a congressman and then as a senator.
Thank you, Susan. I want to thank the panel for joining in today. This is, again, a kind of a brave new world that we're engaged in, but it's important that we have these different views of Montgomery County expressed so that our citizens can share. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.